what was impossible previously or seemed to be impossible now feels possible. And what previously seemed to be a slog, hard work, a struggle, a long-term project suddenly seems to be not only possible, but happening on an accelerated basis.
Could it be that people that are attuned to the higher capacities that are coming online and are switching on, as you and I have reflected in our last call when we talked about Homo Universalis being activated, could it be that we actually need to step up rather than to retreat?
I look forward to the book. This is so rich, and you have distilled, presumably you and the 200 other people who have been working together, you have distilled something of considerable complexity and brought us to the simplicity on the other side of the unfathomable complexity.
This is Jeff and Aviv skating to the frontiers of emergence right after a 4-day event, as we have done over the last 2 years. Jeff, it's really great to see you again.
Thanks, Aviv. It's great to be here with you virtually and on the thin ice of emergence. Although I'll say I have traded in my ice skates for a stand-up paddleboard, in part because where I am in Australia, there have been, well, I'll say biblical rains, and there was a lot of flooding, as you probably noticed in the news. And fortunately, everyone I know is okay, but many people were seriously impacted. So my heart goes out to them, and it's quite meaningful to have visibility into what's really going on with the weather and the big global changes. And it's also meaningful that yesterday, the word of the day was epoch. And I smiled knowing that we would be speaking today about the epoch culmination.
Indeed.
Few things can be bigger than this.
Indeed. Indeed. So what's with me today, reflecting on the last 4 days journey, number one, some overview reflections, 2 or 3 main reflections about doing this work at this time of craziness on the world stage. Secondly, a 3-legged journey that we have often reflected on in what is now 32 days of concentrated 7 to 8 hours kind of days over the last 2 years. And I feel that it has evolved to a point that we would perhaps be benefiting from reflecting on this with you and getting your comments and reflection on that. And then thirdly, we just published a document on portals we call core beliefs and perceptions out of the state of knowing and perceiving. And we may visit 1 or 2 verses there out of the 36 verses. So that's what's alive with me at the moment. What would you want to put to the front end of this conversation that's alive with you?
Well, I would really want to highlight that this is a time of profound transformation. We've been talking about the need for transformation. We've been talking about the fact that changes are afoot for quite some time. And since we last spoke in this way, I have felt, I'll say subjectively and objectively, that something shifted. There's been a pattern shift. In the first part of February, especially, I felt that what was impossible previously or seemed to be impossible now feels possible. And what previously seemed to be a slog, hard work, a struggle, a long-term project, suddenly seems to be not only possible, but happening on an accelerated basis. So there's a shift to possibilities and a kind of fulfillment. In my own lived experience and in the people I work with, I'm seeing similar shifts. It's a non-linear function. We've stepped up, and I don't know exactly what we've stepped up to, but it's new. It may actually be new under the sun, and it's well worth exploring together in various configurations. And I'm sure that's what you were doing this past weekend, and I look forward to hearing a lot about it as time permits.
Indeed, so it's interesting. When you say new under the sun, it does have in it the implicit awareness that we may be receiving here from outside the galaxy permissions, configurations. But that may sound to some a little out there. It is certainly an invitation to consider that there are local nearby sources, and there may be deep space sources that perhaps in metaphoric terms and also in real energetic terms that you are alluding to. So it is curious, you indicate the sense of a step function improvement of something that's present itself as a permission for an acceleration. We've spoken about this in the past and sensed the permission of what we describe as spontaneous transformations, spontaneous elevations, spontaneous capacities switching on. And so I share three reflections, and this awareness comes inside it because I reflected, given that we are in the midst of dramatic events on the world stage, and I don't know by the time we publish this, sometime we publish this a few months after, so I try not to be too specific in the context because then it feels dated, but we are certainly experiencing dramatic events on the world stage. And I reflected that it would be useful to cast back and take some lessons from developmental endeavors and spiritual endeavors during major conflicts, such as World War I, World War II, and I'm not suggesting we are into World War III, even though some people frame that language that I perhaps disagree with, and we can talk about that perhaps another time. And also from my experience in Israel earlier in my life, when there would be kinetic war going on, how does it impact communities that are specifically endeavoring in the developmental and the spiritual sense? So, two case in points that are interesting to reflect on is, and I'm by no way or means an expert, but I've done enough study to reflect. If you look at the work that Rudolf Steiner was doing during pre-World War I and during and after, and then if you look at Gurdjieff and how his work was impacted during World War II, and then nothing to do with these two body of works, but in the kind of endeavors that I've been involved in over the last 3 to 4 decades, in times also in Israel when there was, on certain occasions, a phase of a kinetic conflict underway. The two obvious reflections. One is it presents a challenge. And the challenge is twofold, and I'll mention that in a minute. And it may sound awkward to say it in this way, but there is also opportunity inside the challenge. And the opportunity is that in times and phases like this, people may be more awakened or alerted or accelerated to clarity of purpose and to the sense of needing to become more present to what really matters and is important for them. The two challenges are, one is psychological/practical, and the other is more energetic, and I'm going to use a word here that I will briefly define, astral. And astral, unlike, as it may sound to some, as a woo-woo kind of word, it really is a word that speaks about the energetic nature and the buckets and the banks of energy and force and collective emotions and so on that can stream and enter the bloodstream of large groups of people and humanity at large in difficult times. So you've got that, which is an energetic dimension, and you've got the psychological dimension. We're human beings. We will suffer anxiety, pressure, stress. Both of those dimensions can become a blockage, a wall of separation from the higher levels that we may reach for in terms of our creative, connective communion capacity. And I'm also proposing, and reflected during this event, could it be that groups all around the world are attuned to those higher realms of potential, instead of retreating and shrinking from the bigger prospect and potential, as we have seen in some of the examples that I've reflected on? They were more forced to retreat in some way from the highest, most being at the cutting edge of the work, more to address the human level needs and concerns. And I'm proposing, could it be that people that are attuned to the higher capacities that are coming online and are switching on, as you and I have reflected in our last call when we talked about Homo Universalis being activated, could it be that we actually need to step up rather than to retreat? So that was reflection one. The second reflection that goes with it is, well, there was a question that came up on system overload. How is it, and how do you manage, just in the intensity of news and the intensity of what we all need to deal with in a super modern, postmodern world with a cacophony of noise? How do you handle the sensory overload? And specifically, how do you create for yourself more space, energetic space, psychological space, spiritual space, mental, developmental space? And we talked about many aspects of this, and we could spend 2-3 hours just talking about that. But one important awareness that we focused on was that to create a larger space, one must, strong word, one can, if you want to be a little gentler there, increase significantly their inner conductivity. And the way one increases their inner conductivity is one of the technologies you and I have explored, reflected on the idea of loom work, but not loom work as a mental or conceptual or notion type process, but as a living, embodied, actual way of being in the felt sense, where we go more than being multi-paradigmatic and multi-perspectival. We actually go multi-dimensional in that we are able to look at the many different frameworks and modalities and dimensions of life, and to a point that we step and transcend the not just the polarization that's often present in this day and age, but the capacity to look at the multidimensionality, the threefold, the fourfold, the fivefold, the sevenfold aspects of many of the things you look at. And once you bring those together inside a loom process, a loom configuration, if you look at one element and you discover 5 facets of that, and you look at another system or another modality or another structure of thought and activate there the 3 or 4 or 5-fold, all of a sudden you have a multivariant, high permutation system. And what we actually did was we produced a menu of 102 structures, technologies, looms, inquiries, contemplations, methodologies that we reflected on and reviewed over the last 2 years through these 30 some days of intense processes, and we put them as a menu where the practice was take any 2 or 3 and begin to weave their interlacing connection and potential and what they unlock. And some of the comments coming from people participating was, never mind about connecting 2, 3, or 4. How about connecting the full enchilada, the whole thing? Because when you do, you actually are forced to transcend the slower consciousness, the slower brain consciousness, and you've got to enter a switched on, higher capacity, higher consciousness, one that you're not habituated by, which you and I have spoken of by way of allowing yourself to be led through the unconscious, which is another way of saying inviting or surrendering a super consciousness process to switch on such that you become larger in the space that you occupy. And that one of the ways to deal with sensory overload or feeling very crowded is to awaken, to activate that multi-dimensional nature that human life in potential is. The human is not one thing, but rather is a multiplicity in one. We at least have the 7 levels, or the 12 levels, or the 16 levels, or the 21 levels within the human system. And when we allow these to run free as an operating system underlying the new information and the new insights that are coming your way, you're all of a sudden dealing truly in the multidimensionality. And rather than feeling more overloaded, you actually have increasing space. And so that's partly how I smiled when you were describing the instantaneous transformation that can occur. Partly we are describing that switching on, where the human can access, as we said, near space and deep space all at the same time, and can actually process in concurrency those different systems and localities all at the same time. The third reflection, which is a build on the first and the second, was, okay, but when you deal in times of conflict and strife and fear and anxiety, the human system can overheat and can get loaded. What is it that we can do when we bring together, say, 200 people on a global Zoom call from all 12 or whatever time zones? And how do we deal with, in a practical way, to expand and facilitate the space? So this is where, in the simple foundational level we've discussed before, Jeff, we create times of silent contemplation. We create times when people, each one of us, can stay with a contemplative inquiry when music plays in the background. This time we employed some additional technologies. And some of the modalities we used recognized these 2 hands that are not just made to grab a cup of water, glass of water. These are also tools, living bioenergetic tools that emit, transmit, and receive energy. And as we see, for example, in the worlds of martial arts or Tai Chi, you can actually create a set of movements that will change the nature of the energy in the space that you occupy. So imagine that you have 200 people and they decide to think healing thoughts all at the same time. Imagine that you have 200 people and together in symphony, in a symphonic fashion, they decide to move their arms in something that would look like Tai Chi, but is not Tai Chi, but has a specific intentionality, which is to cool the space, such that we all may be able to enter a finer, subtler, more capacity building, capacity increasing, space making kind of contemplation and inquiry. So, and we reflected how powerful and how important it is that we use those modalities and we integrate the human system, the somatic awareness. How do we drop down here in the solar plexus area? And as we drop down there, how do we then step back and create that space, that cavern space, to expand it? Because when we do that, we actually increase the energetic heart that we can proffer to each other, and so many other ways and modalities. So I'm simply bringing the awareness that, especially in time of challenge, it's not just about the words we can say, it's not just about the concepts that we can present, it's about facilitating a whole person throughout embodied experience, because we are not going to facilitate transformation and development and elevation just with the head. It's going to have to be the entire human system. So these are by way of 3 awarenesses and reflections from these 4 days. And let me pause here and ask what is coming alive in you when you hear these experiences.
Well, the phrase supreme wholeness and the supreme connectivity, inviting not just the connecting of a few ideas to a few other ideas, or the recognition of a few correspondences and connecting those with a few other correspondences in some other system. What comes to mind is a line actually from a film about Gurdjieff, whom you mentioned earlier. The film is called Meetings with Remarkable Men, which I would retitle Meetings with Remarkable People, be that as it may. There's a spiritual master who says either the human system is very complex. Either you change all of it or you change none of it. And I think within a word or two, that's a good paraphrase. So the step change is surrendering to the possibility that there is some aspect of us that knows how to work with all of it. And it isn't contained within the mind. And I would say it isn't contained within anything we can draw a line around. It isn't contained within a human body, but somehow the human body is isomorphic to it. And so we can access the capital I, it of it, through our vessel. And so the embodied practices, the somatic awareness, that's essential for working with supreme wholeness.
This idea you shared is a critical, developmental, but also strategic mindset in any of the work I do in the world of organizational leadership and strategy. The idea that, I'll say it in 2 different ways because it emphasizes 2 different nuances in this. One way to say it is that to change one thing, you have to change 101 things, because the whole system is interconnected. And the other way to say it is the way you have framed it. When you changed one thing, you have practically changed 101 things. Very important insights, and is practical awareness when we look at global change and evolutionary change. When we inquire about the largest scale of global systems. But perhaps we can park that for another call and another time. That deserves a deep dive. So how about if I share with you this 3-legged journey that we reflected on?
Please.
Okay. So the 3 journeys. We describe the 3 journeys as a simplified fractal that may occur many times rather than just on one occasion. And if you like, is an archetypal framing of a classic journey. So here is the way I begin to tell the story. A life appears into this human journey, which I would say more about that word appears, but a universal life, a universal intelligence shows up as a new human on planet Earth. And quite immediately and early in life, depends on the ecology, that young life and into this early schooling and education, discover that they are living in a noisy, chaotic world that has largely gone mad. And what I mean by that simply is that we are now operating in a modern, postmodern world where the general orientation, now 400 years into the scientific revolution that enabled the industrial revolution and that enabled the next technological evolutions and that released in concurrent fashion the free market economies and all that enabled and the wonderful things that became available for us, that's great. What I'm specifically drawing a line to is how we are now seeing ourselves, our generation, certainly people that are born today, they were born into a world that's noisy, chaotic, crowded, where the orientation is not to human purpose and in the sense of the creative, connective, higher potential of human life, but rather, as we know, over the last 6 decades, we don't call people, we call them the consumer. You and I, we are viewed by the governing paradigm as the consumer. Have you noticed they talk about humanity often as the consumer wants this or the consumers wants that? They don't talk about the creator or the co-creator or the life-giving permission that we would describe as much more central to human life. Now, why this is a problem is there are 4 impediments. The first impediment is that this pressure system that we all find ourselves in act as a distancing vector from your natural essence, as a result of which we are forever suffering the inadequacy trap because we are centered so much on all that we need from the outside and all that the outside world and the pressure system demands of us, and it builds a sense that we are always in some kind of shortfall, and that builds the dependency trap, and that builds the mental health issues and the energetic issues and the weakening issues, all of which I'm putting here just as a context. And you could tell that little story in 7 other different ways, but I'm saying all those are some background to a journey 1, the escape, some sense that's awakened in a person, maybe when they're 12, maybe when they're 16, perhaps in their early 20s, sometimes into their early 30s. They search for something, they say there is more to life than even success and money and power and likes on social media. What is that sense of more? How and where can I find it? And they embark on a journey, maybe a spiritual quest, maybe a learning quest, maybe a religious quest. So many different ways to embark on that path. And what they are seeking to find in that path, consciously or unconsciously, is they're seeking to find some source that will all of a sudden put in a different context, in a different perspective, that noisy, chaotic world, and will literally enable them to escape and be and enter a different world. a world where there is a permission to encounter a different source of knowledge, a different source of experience, a different source of energy, a different source of light and joy and happiness and love. And often it takes the form of a teacher or a community. And I dare say I'm focusing here on the constructive escape. There are also destructive escape routes that I'm not integrating in a primary way to the mapping here. And once that encounter takes place, the person now is quote unquote enlightened or energized or uplifted or whatever many words and verbs would describe that in the different context of the modality, or whether it's an Eastern or Western or an integration of an East and West or any other spiritual path, there is some kind of an encounter with a source, sometimes we will call it a higher source, that literally awakens in a person a whole new experience that takes them into a different world, a world that for the first time they feel is not governed by the noise and the chaos they experience in what they were surrounded by earlier. And then something important happens. And now we come to the interesting part of the journey, because that first leg of the journey is a leg that had been taken by people from the beginning of time, even before the modern world. But now what I'm about to describe are the two traps that often govern the post-encounter experience. And those two traps, they take the nature of the intoxication and the identification trap. The identification trap is when a person, having had one experience or succession of experiences with teaching, with a teacher, with an ecology of practices, with domains of possibilities that open up for them, they get so excited with the new capabilities that are switching on for them that they fall into the trap of identifying with the experience or with the source, thinking that they are the source, thinking that they are the source of light now, and they develop a very big head about it. And a whole other range of psychological, behavioral, interpersonal issues that arise because there hasn't actually been yet the development of the infrastructure and the scaffolds that would support holding a more sophisticated, complex system with the energetic release and yield that will be unlocked in that. And it leads to what I'm describing as the identification trap. The other trap is the intoxication trap, is getting so drunk, but not drunk by alcohol, but drunk by the energetic property, by the luminescence that envelops them inside the discoveries that they are making, to a point that the energy that's being unlocked, instead of being used as a fuel to do more development work, which I will get to in a minute in Journey 2, the intoxication is simply a way of wasting the elevation, the uplift, the source into foolish, unproductive. Now, the one caveat is nothing wrong with being joyous and happy and celebrating and sermonizing. All that is great. I'm specifically highlighting the danger in intoxication. And some tinge of intoxication is wonderful because it actually releases you from habitual patterns that you were governed by before you have gone on to make contact with the source. What I'm talking about is falling on the other side of intoxication, where you use the energy in an unproductive way. Now I'm approaching what is the critical inflection point and the transition from Journey 1 to Journey 2 as a way of solving those traps or addressing those traps and the choice that's involved. But before I go there, let me pause here because that's a lot, and I'm sure you have some comments on this so far.
Well, you've said it very well and very clearly. So there are no questions that come to me. I have a sense that what you are mapping may have similarities to the journeys that Meher Baba mapped out in a book called God Speaks, the journeys of God, the planes of existence, the migration of the soul through these planes of experience and challenges. There are regions on one of the maps in that book for the mast, for the God mad or God intoxicated. And that is a bit of a cul-de-sac along the journey. And certainly identification has its challenges, and yet within the identification there's a grain of truth. Within the intoxication there's a grain of truth. So the challenge is to stay in right relationship and balance with what's true in all of these potentialities. So within intoxication, there is the bliss of being that, the bliss of actually being the source, not an idea of the source. At the deepest root of identity, one is in fact the source. But if we're not abiding and resolved at that depth, then when we identify with being the source, it's very confused and problematic and even destructive. So I just want to affirm the subtleties that you've already alluded to on these journeys.
So yes and yes and yes, in that as we do when we do shadow work, one of the elements to always integrate is to find what is, as you said, the truth, the higher truth that's concealed inside that shadow content. What we are specifically describing in the identification trap is being already in the contracted state, but imagining that you are still in the blissful, expansive state, which is not the case. And often the contraction actually occurs because of the misplaced identification. So now we come to what I'm describing as the choice. And the invitation in the choice is to recognize those various traps and make the decision inside the encounter with the source, inside what you describe the blissful fullness of becoming source, to the choice to right there and then embrace the fullness of the human spectrum and its earthly journey. And when one does, I'm describing that as the beginning of journey 2, the ensoulment. So let me say a word about the word ensoulment here. The word ensoul means to receive a soul, to be given a soul. And I use here the term soul initially in the, not the generalized, loose sense, but rather in the more specific sense, that the soul is a standard issue, spirit-like, planetary, orchestrating intelligence that enters the human system with the spirit during the time of what we know as the quickening, sometime between the 16th to the 20th week of the pregnancy, when the fetus, the embryo, become alive. I am not talking about that kind of ensoulment. I'm talking here about a different kind of ensoulment. And I'm using the word more as in the sense of, so the function of the soul is it's an orchestrating bloom of intelligence, because the higher source from which human life emanates or originates is above planetary, but coming into the human system, the planetary system, the human body, it needs a mediating intelligence. That's what the soul is. The soul mediates, needing to negotiate all the actualities and realities of the planetary life. What I am proposing here in the idea of the ensoulment is that the human make a choice to journey back to life, back to the middle, from the mountain back to the middle. It's the refusal to stay in the quote-unquote monastic retreat from the world, but the journey back into the world. And that choice, that agreement, that sense of I am here, in a minute I'll highlight 3 different natures of that, amounts to and accounts to as a formation of a new operating system. If the initial instinct is to run away from pain, to run away from what scares us, to run away from danger, sometime journey 2 will introduce the reason to step into embracing pain, into embracing peril, into embracing what may appear frightening because of a higher reason, because we choose to do a certain work. And so here are the 3 natures that I highlight. You could probably describe others, but path A is the development path, the development work within a specific tasking or a broad range of development taskings that now we are able to approach because of that higher conductivity and higher perception and higher range, greater, larger vista that opened for us as a result of the encounter with Source. That's path A, where we are still high here in that accentuated, expanded state, and we use that to say, you know what, rather than crushing on the way down, I am deliberately making the path down to address this developmental need. I'm going to use that awareness. I'm not going to be able to stay in the expanded state, but I'm going to stay tethered to that awareness and the way it lives in me, both lives as L-I-V-E, but also what it lives in me as a residue, such that I carry it into this journey. So that's path A. Path B is adjacent, is the discovery work, is where I decide to go and study, go and research, go and explore, go and discover, including shadow work. And you could say that the shadow work is present both in path A and in path B, but this is more of a discovery and integration path, specifically to inquire into areas that I couldn't inquire into before, but because I am now making from this place that choice to embrace the permission of this journey, I can, because of that enhancement, I can discover what before was a blind spot or something I couldn't see. And then, obviously and naturally, path C, the service work, which often when we embark on that journey to serving other people, to be serving a purposeful cause, including healing, including teaching, including leading, and the many other facets, often when you embrace this path, it will by itself bring online elements of path A and path B. And what I'm proposing then, that as a result of that, and the journey of ensoulment, which is journey back into life, not away from life. You think about it, throughout the ages, you'd often have people that, quote unquote, went on the monastic experience because they wanted away from the noisy, chaotic world. But you have the Aristotelian message that to become a fully realized human, you actually need to mix with other people. You need to be in the noise of the city life and actually do your development journey as a test case of your capacity to hold the high, the middle, and the low, and the full spectrum in between. Hence, the second journey, the Ensoulment Journey, which I'm proposing when we embark on that journey, it will naturally lead to the third journey, which is the journey of spiritualization, where we bring back to the high communion, now not as escapees or rescuees from a chaotic world, but really having embraced more the pain, the struggle, the grief, the anguish of being incomplete humans on a journey where we fall on our face and we've got to pick ourselves up, and we lose our grip, and we have to bring hands together again, as on another portal's call Team Clute shared in a beautiful way. When we have to do all this to then journey back to the point of communion, when we bring back to source, now not just desperation that we showed in the initial journey one, but we appear to source now as companioning the source with added witnessing intelligence and experience of the struggle of human life inside a chaotic world, saying, our job here is to ascend, transcend, integrate it all, and become part of this industry of spiritualizing the universe by becoming conscious to who we truly are, right? In journey one, you were a human seeking the spiritual experience. In journey two, you ensouled yourself with new agreements to embrace the totality of the human deal. In journey three, you are no longer the human seeking the spiritual experience. You are now recognizing that you're actually a spirit being, having chosen to embrace the human experience, such that you bring to the spirit realm expanded awareness and consciousness. So these are the abbreviated story of the three journeys.
I look forward to the book. This is so rich, and you have distilled, presumably you and the 200 other people who have been working together, you have distilled something of considerable complexity and brought us to the simplicity on the other side of the unfathomable complexity.
Yeah, this is the simple version. Journey one, the escape. Journey two, the ensoulment, based in an agreement of what the human case on earth is. It truly is. And journey three, that actually is birthed inside journey two, the spiritualization. So think about journey two and journey three as a double helix rather than a sequential thing that occurs all at the same time.
Yes, the simultaneity is important, and I feel that this is providing an empowering context within which we can locate ourselves. In the double helix process, we can ask intuitively, am I experiencing the ensoulment aspect a bit more, or the spiritualization aspect a bit more? Or perhaps there's a part of me that is still seeking to escape even as these other aspects of the journey are strongly alive. And then this knowledge can help to guide us in right action so we can respond appropriately to the process that is actually happening for us and for all of us, given the supreme connectivity that we are leaning into.
The richness and the beauty of this comment you're offering is recognizing that, as we said, we are a multiplicity. We are not a one thing going through these journeys. So as you said, you may be in journey two, but you may be encountering a challenge that's bigger than your capacity to hold the pain. And you may want to run away from that. And you may literally run away from that, only to discover that so much of the ensoulment journey is a journey of increasing capacity, increasing capacity to hold the contradictions of life. The Ensoulment Journey is a journey not to escape anymore the contradictions of life, but to learn to embrace the greater, larger contradiction in living, which is the fact that we are a spiritual being inside the human experience. That is by itself a contradiction. A translucent luminescence kind of glowing intelligence coming into a physical, biological, carnal, physical world is a contradiction. Other than it is by design, because there is an experience here in this organic level of process where we have the permission to crystallize something and dissolve it, crystallize it and dissolve it. And every time the heat is larger in the Ensoulment Journey, whatever we thought we have accomplished and became crystallized melts away, and we dissolve again in the presence of. And we think, oh, so I'm not so good as I thought I was. Ha! Right? And I'm back on my face, and I now need to pick myself up, and I have the planetary journey as a permission to, here are the words, travel deeper into source, now the source in me, and whatever I may be joined to find an even higher crystallization that will withstand this kind of increasing heat. And that happens in a person's own experience, and that happens when we serve and help and facilitate and coach and heal and lead others.
Well, I feel the genius of the human is to be all of it. And what seems to be a contradiction ceases to be when there's a kind of deep relaxation that all of it is as it is, really, that we are all of it. We simply are all of it.
Indeed. And we have the capacity to self-guide, to self-elect, to self-author who we are becoming inside the wholeness and the allness. I don't think there is a word like this in the English dictionary, but since everybody listening to our conversation is fully aware that I often make grammatic mistakes, I give myself sometime what some will see as unwarranted permission to make up words, and the way you said all is life, I said so the allness, and we have the capacity to choose how we will author ourselves inside that allness in terms of the importances, the values, the sentiments that we dedicate ourselves to and that we choose to serve.
You have complete permission from me to make up words. And in this case, I will say allness is a word in my vocabulary.
Okay.
And I don't know what dictionaries we might find it in, but it's a very useful word.
That's awesome. So I wonder if we want to take another moment to go into segment 3 in our conversation and reflect on this, which we published on the site here under Out from a State of Knowing and Perceiving. Now, the document, when you've seen it in a draft form, had the introduction, which is the personal part, on top, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted for a person to be able to come straight to number 1. We are living into times of an accelerated evolutionary change. Okay, out of a state of knowing and perceiving. So a person can read that and say, I see that. I know that to be true. I can perceive that. So that moment when a person would read that, they will say, okay, so this is not just a state of knowing and perceiving of somebody else. It's a state of knowing and perceiving that's inclusive of my own knowing and perceiving. The 3,500 years epochal journey is reaching a culminating transition. Within that, an epoch is a measure of universal time, an actuating pattern inside of a universal blueprint, a fractal you may choose to call it, where certain developments and evolution are permitted and supported. At this point, persons say, well, let's read a little more. So they go to number 3 and they say, as the epoch culminates, all around and inside each one of us. Okay, so it's not a story about something that's happening outside of me, it's inclusive of me. The epoch culminates as a drama, as a story drama outside in the world, in the way of culture, in the rise and fall of great civilizations, but also it is culminating inside each one of us. So I am a character in the story, and the story unfolds in me and my struggle and my moments of discovery and moments of despair. They're all part of that epochal culmination story. And then it says, as the epoch culminates all around and inside each one of us, humanity is experiencing a deep crisis of the spirit, which begs a question and presented us with a problem, because potentially we will need to create an appendix with many secondary notes to define how do we mean spirit here. Earlier in this conversation, I already contexted a spirit in a particular way. It's not spoken of here in the generalized sense of the spirit. So at this point, somebody may choose to read the personal preamble comment where there is a bit of a description in a generalized way of my own journey, but it's not really just a representation of my own journey, but the journey that involve many of the friends and the people that are on a similar journey like my own, and the collective wisdom, or the corrective wisdom, or the connective wisdom that we together generate, and how it informs this journey and what it suggests and indicates. So I thought we would go to 2 or 3 of the verses here that, when I shared with you the original draft, you highlighted. As you said, it's not that you disliked the other 34, but you were switched on, shall we say, activated. But before I go there, anything else in your unique capacity, Jeff, to scan what's happening in the broader field of consciousness throughout all that humanity is experiencing at this time, that you would offer, and you may come at this with different maps and different terminologies, but we have spoken about what we're just looking at here in several ways over the last 2 years.
What you have produced is a wisdom artifact. It is a polished gem of insight. It is multifaceted, it is multidimensional, and it is accessible. I would love to see this go far and wide. If I had a top 10 list of wisdom artifacts for these times to provide context and meaning to those who are struggling to make sense of the chaotic world gone mad, I would put this high on the list. So first, I want to bow with deep appreciation to everyone who has participated and contributed to this gem. And then I want to offer encouragement to share it appropriately. Let it go where it will, because that's primarily how it will travel. And to hold it very openly. I see that it's a public resource.
Yes.
And that is heartening, because this is of universal import.
Yes. And as we say here, this is a work in progress, evolving document. It's a draft. So it's a work in progress, evolving draft that we will likely add and update if and when we need to.
And there's no need to wait until it's reached some theoretical completion. I'm sensing that it will always be a work in progress, that the wisdom artifacts are actually alive and therefore evolving and changing subtly and in very visible ways. So let it change and let it out of the box. Not that it's in a box, although I see on the right you have one.
Right.
I was feeling that the word spirit could be hypertext, so it could be linked to what you mean by that. At some point, this is tactical, but in terms of helping people to integrate in real time the meaning.
Exactly, we will have to produce something to link to, but you see, we did not yet publish the last conversation. As we speak this, right today, as we record, we did not yet publish the last conversation with you that we called Homo Universalis activated. But when we do, there will be a hyperlink here to that conversation, because we really explore the fields that potentiate and activate Homo Universalis. I equally see the possibility that we may hold specific conversations that say stay with 3 verses, and we spend a couple of hours opening the intention and the meaning, not so much in a teaching workshop, but in a discovery kind of dialogue and conversation.
That will work well.
So here, let me read 2 verses 11 and 12 and see what just in the moment, what comes alive in you for that. Or would you rather that you read this and then you ad lib and go live with commentary? What works better?
Well, I would love to hear it spoken in your voice. And then, of course, I will be very happy to comment.
Okay. So again, we're going here non-linear. So we went straight to number 11 from whatever we were, number 3, which is part of the way to do this. Actually, I'm changing. I'll go from 10, because 10, 11, 12, they are a unified body of awareness. Number 10, the scientific revolution brought to humanity extraordinary breakthroughs that advanced and benefited many fields. It also has left behind and largely thrown out, like the baby with the bathwater, other inner and intuitive ways of knowing of the whole person living actuality. Number 11. So much of the momentous development emerging since the mid-20th century has been technologically driven. This is wonderful in the versatile possibilities opened for us, and is concurrently highly problematic in its byproducts. Number 12. One of the problematic byproducts is the anchoring phenomenon, in that most people alive now came of age with this formative imprint and mindset, namely that technology can and will solve all our problems and challenges. This false premise and foolishness are extrapolated into techno-utopian madness that envisions uploading human consciousness to the cloud to have cyber-humans replace real humans. The curious and fantastically strange thing about this egoic arrogance is that even these ideas are made possible by the inner human technology and creativity of the human mind, the indication from which is that there is something far superior in the origination of human consciousness. This superior origin is falsely translated into the techno-immortality fantasy as a substitute in the absence of a higher realization of immortal spiritual continuance into the greater universe. So I may have lost some people in this and may have found 1 or 2 people that would be upset with this, but the when this download came through, it wanted to come with this energy, and it did not seek to be politically correct, and decided not to worry about whoever in the technological world working on these technological visions in case they choose to get upset with what we articulate here. We love them anyway, the way they are. They're obviously most brilliant and creative people, that they are pushing these frontiers. There is something about what I'm describing here as egoic foolishness of very, very, very rich people who are simply desperately looking to immortalize their consciousness rather than realizing that actually life and death has a function, and it's part of why we go through these cycles in this planetary experience, but that is something to be left for another time. So that's me offering a bit of a commentary on 12. Let me go quiet here and see what comes alive for you about 10, 11, and 12.
Well, 12 may be a bit of a gut punch, and that may be precisely what's called for, to shake loose certain ideas. At the same time, I see that these ideas, these fantasies, this form of madness does serve a purpose which it does not understand. And what I'm seeing is that as spirit, as consciousness, as life steps into a higher level of complexity, which seems to be one of the functions of life, to create higher and higher orders of experience and luminous structure in order to know itself more and more fully and in new ways, and somehow even more wholly. And actually holy, H-O-L-Y, is relevant here as well, because I want to sacralize the process of the technology exploration currently run amok, but where I see it going is pointing us back to our own inner technology. So if life breathes itself out into greater complexity, and there is an externalization and an identification with the external, and even an intoxication with the external, then there is the encounter with everything that works and everything that doesn't work, with this new level of complexity. We stepped into a form of unknown structure, and then we deal with the consequences. And then we discover that the solutions to the wicked problems that have been engendered must be within us. And there are evolutionary stresses and pressures that bring us back to the originating consciousness within us. And then we have a great appreciation for the technology, and we learn to use it in right ways. So without the identification, without the intoxication, we might not have stepped so fully into the next level of complexity. We might not have breathed ourselves out fully to the point where we can then begin to breathe back in and reconnect with our profound capacities. We may have sought immortality in a technologically fetishistic way, only to discover that we're immortal a priori. We're immortal to begin with, not in the human form, but in a form that is deeply fulfilling. And when we relax into our a priori nature, the human experience becomes so much more joy-filled, because it's no longer a struggle for survival. Surrendered human experience is an absolute joy. And I can speak directly from personal experience on this one. With a love, by the way, okay, Coda, a love of technology. I've been on the path of breathing into technology to the point of creating artificial worlds within the world. And then there was a point where a U-turn happened, and I realized the software that I had been creating and evolving and healing, fixing bugs as a kind of healing process, was actually creating, evolving, and healing that which I am. But it took that seemingly external exploration to bring me back to what I am. So awakening through software development is, I think, going to become a common spiritual path in Silicon Valley. It probably is happening already. And then another quote comes to mind, which is, it probably has been said by many, but I heard it from somebody named Michael Mead. And it is, we come to what is true by way of what is false.
Mm. Yes, yes. And how awesome that so much of what you spoke to there is actually totally integrated and part of the document in many other verses, because the document actually, which to me is a validation that we are speaking from within the same domain of awareness, because you read a draft of it 2 months ago, and it actually talks about the intractable, wicked problems, and how so much of the solution is indeed in what you're describing as the turning back inside, inside to be activated, to be awakened in the inner human technology. That is ultimately where the larger breakthrough and unlock power is, and together with all the other genius technologies that we are developing, but not in separation from the human technology, like separation from what these wonderful things, yes, we can work on a keyboard, but let's not forget that these hands can heal as well as fix things. So there is a whole range of human inner technologies that we left behind in the massive race to scale the technological riches that have been developed in Silicon Valley, which again we love. We're speaking on a technology like this, so we are not sorry for those gifts that came for humanity. What we're describing is the imbalance and the reintegration and the re-embrace and the rediscovery of the natural inner human technologies. So Jeff, as always, awesome to be on a journey like this with you. After 4 days, you have a way of creating an ecology into which there is a possibility to, in just an hour, distill so much of the, 28 hours that we've been in with a large group. And I'm always so appreciative of your generosity and the ecology that you're able to create.
Thank you, Aviv. It is a joy, and it's also an honor to be witness to this body of wisdom that is being revealed at this time. And I'm grateful to you for staying with it. I'm sure you could not do otherwise. It's your nature to see things through and to explore in detail what it is that is actually happening. So it's a great gift that you're offering, and I'm grateful to be on this thin ice with you.
Thank you.